He looked me in the eye, smiled, and said it. "She's just a housewife, Your Honor." The courtroom didn't gasp. But my heart did. 12 years. 12 years of folding his shirts, managing his schedule, raising our 2 kids, making his mother feel like a queen every Sunday. And now I glanced down at the navy sheath dress I'd chosen that morning. It used to be my lucky interview dress before I traded resumes for permission slips. Before my name became Ben's wife instead of Karen Delaney CPA. And he said it like I hadn't built anything. Like the late nights with spreadsheets, the hidden freelance invoices, the quiet checks from bakery owners and hair salon managers didn't count. He said it like I hadn't spent the past 6 years building something he never even noticed. Before I tell you what the judge read next, let me know where you're watching from. And subscribe if you've ever been called just anything by someone who should have known better. His lawyer chuckled beside him. My palms went cold. Across the aisle, our daughter's school backpack sat by my chair, purple sparkly with a missing zipper. I'd sewn that zipper shut at 2 a.m. the same week I reconciled end-of-year taxes for 3 clients while nursing strep throat. But sure, just a housewife. He thought this hearing was his victory lap. That he'd painted me into a corner, jobless, dependent, obsolete. He thought I'd sit quietly while he rewrote our history in legal terms. I smiled too, finally. The judge reached for the folder my lawyer had just handed over. 6 years of quietly filed tax returns. 6 years of consulting income. 6 years of proof that I had never, not for a single moment, stopped being more than enough. Ben leaned back in his seat. The moment that folder opened, the power shifted. And he didn't even see it coming. If someone tried to erase your worth, would you fight quietly or let them win? Stay with me, because this was only the beginning. Before I show you how I ended up in that courtroom, tell me, have you ever ignored a red flag because you wanted to believe in love? The first time Ben dismissed my work, we were sitting on the kitchen floor, barefoot, drinking wine out of mismatched mugs. It was 6 months before we got married. I had just finished a long tax season at the firm in Durham, running numbers for clients who thought quarterlies were optional. Ben, freshly promoted at his consulting firm, said with a grin, "You're too smart to be doing other people's math." I laughed then. Thought it was a compliment. Looking back, it was the first chip. Our house in Raleigh wasn't grand, but I loved it. Maple cabinets, chipped counters, and the smell of cinnamon in the fall from the neighbor's porch. Ben said it looked too middle class. We renovated. Granite. Chrome. Cold. It stopped smelling like home. I got pregnant with Eli in 2011. Ben insisted I quit work just until the baby sleeps through the night. I agreed. 1 year turned into 12. I didn't mind at first. I loved being home, especially during the early years. Morning pancakes, library trips, tiny handprints on the fridge. But over time things shifted. Ben's career took off. He started flying out every Monday, back by Thursday if at all. New suits, fancier clients, nicer watch, colder eyes. I noticed the shift in how he introduced me. From Karen, my wife, she's brilliant with numbers, to "This is Karen. She runs the house." The shift was subtle, but I felt it in the way people stopped asking me questions at dinners. The way they talked over me, not with me. Once at a holiday party, someone asked what I did. Before I could answer, Ben leaned in and said, "She's retired early, living the dream." I smiled, but something inside me went silent that night. The silence grew louder when our youngest Ava started first grade. I had time again, hours between drop-off and pickup. So when a friend from church asked if I could help with bookkeeping for her floral shop, I said yes, no charge. Just a few spreadsheets. It felt good. Too good. Soon it was another business. Then 2. I kept it quiet. Filed under a different LLC. It wasn't about hiding. It was about holding something that was mine. I opened a small account at the local credit union. Ben never noticed. He never asked. I'd work while dinner simmered, while laundry spun, while the house was still. The checks weren't big, $600 here, $1, $200 there. But I saw something I hadn't seen in years: my name on a payment line. Still, I made every soccer game, every dentist appointment. I was present, but I wasn't seen. Ben started leaving his phone face down, started forgetting to mention names, especially hers. One evening he came home from a team offsite with a faint perfume I didn't wear. Not cheap, not floral. Sharp. Clean like a hotel. I asked how it went. He barely looked up from his phone. Standard. Nothing to write home about. The same week our joint credit card showed a charge for Bistro Del Mar. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of Syrah. I didn't ask, I just started saving receipts. When I mentioned maybe taking on more clients, Ben laughed. Sure, just don't let it distract you from the real job. The kids need you. Translation, I need you to stay small, convenient, non-threatening. So I smiled, and I said nothing. But inside, I was building. On Ava's birthday, I paid for the decorations using income from my latest client. Not a dime from our shared card. Ben didn't notice. Or maybe he did. Maybe that's when he started tightening the leash, asking more about where I was, why I needed 2 laptops, what I did on Tuesdays. But it was already too late. I was 6 years deep into something he didn't even know existed. My business wasn't just a secret, it was my backup plan. My exit route. My evidence. I didn't know when I'd need it, but I knew I would. And that terrified me. Have you ever had to prepare in silence just in case love wasn't enough? Tell me below. You're not alone. It started with the emails. Ben had always been careless with his devices until one morning he left his work laptop open on the kitchen island while he ran upstairs to take a call. I wasn't snooping. I was packing Ava's lunch. The screen lit up on its own. Subject line, next weekend, just us, sender, M. Blake. Signed, simply M. I froze, a slice of apple still in my hand. The words stared back at me, glowing on the screen like a match held over dry paper. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Something in my chest sank, and something else hardened. That night, I made meatloaf. His favorite. He barely touched it, said he had a headache. Said he'd be traveling again Friday for a team leadership summit. I nodded and smiled like always. But I watched. The next day, after I dropped Ava off at school, I sat in my car and Googled her. Madison Blake. Project manager. 29. Blonde, lives alone. Smiles like she's never had to wonder if she's enough. I stared at her LinkedIn photo for too long. Polished. Effortless. No kids, no stretch marks, no PTA forms in her purse. Just ambition and contour and a job title that sounded vague and important. And yet I didn't cry, I didn't scream or throw anything or call a friend. I printed the email. I filed it. Same folder as my client contracts, quarterly reports, receipts. The folder I had labeled Katie Holdings, private. It lived behind the stack of board games in the hallway closet, right between Scrabble and Connect 4. Ben never looked there. Ben never looked at anything unless it served him. That Friday, he left as planned. Duffel bag packed, blazer slung over his shoulder. He kissed the top of my head and said, "Don't wait up." I didn't. What he didn't know, what he never even bothered to ask, was that I had business in Charlotte too. One of my longtime clients, a boutique stationery shop, had referred me to a local wedding planner with 6 vendors needing help. We scheduled an in-person consultation at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hotel Ben said he was staying at. I checked into my own hotel late afternoon. Put on jeans, a soft gray sweater, no makeup. I didn't want to be recognized, I just wanted the truth. At 7:42 p.m., I sat in the corner booth of the bar attached to his hotel. Ordered sparkling water. Watched the door. At 8:05 he walked in, wearing the navy blazer I'd picked for him last Christmas. Right behind him, her. Long waves. A fitted black dress, red lipstick. They sat across from me and never noticed. He leaned in too close. Brushed her hand when he laughed. Ordered for her without asking. She giggled, and I documented. Not for revenge. Not for drama. but because this was the moment the fog finally cleared. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overthinking. I was right. I left before they did. Walked back to my hotel. Didn't look back. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I updated 3 invoices, drafted a newsletter campaign, and submitted an application for a small business development grant I'd bookmarked 2 years ago but never dared to apply for. Because somewhere between that email and that barstool something in me shifted. Fear wasn't the loudest voice anymore. Clarity was. The next morning I got up early. Had coffee alone on the hotel balcony. The sky was pale pink. Quiet. Empty. I opened a new spreadsheet. Renamed my freelance business. Filed to reserve a new business name, Delaney Strategies, LLC. Something clean. Professional. Mine. By 10 a.m. I was at the UPS store making notarized copies of every major document I owned. LLC registration, EIN confirmation, client contracts, income statements, taxes. I even printed screenshots of all deposits made to my private bank account. At home, I reorganized everything. Created backups on 2 encrypted flash drives. One went into the safe deposit box I'd opened under my name. The other went into the bottom of my sewing kit right under the spools of navy thread no one had touched in years. I told no one. Not because I didn't trust anyone, but because I needed one thing in this life to be just mine. Ben returned Sunday night whistling. He tossed his bag into the laundry room, kissed Ava on the forehead, and said, "Did you miss me, girls?" I stood by the sink. Hands deep in soapy water. Heart steady. That week, I started noticing what I hadn't before. How he'd interrupt me mid-sentence at the dinner table. Correct me on details that didn't matter. Dismiss my clients as local ladies who needed a hobby. Talk over me when we were out with friends. He'd always done it. I just hadn't seen it. Or worse, I had accepted it as normal. Once during a tense bedtime moment, Ava asked him for help on her math homework. He waved her off. Ask Mom. That's her thing. Then, without looking up from his phone, "But don't expect too much. She hasn't done real math in years." He laughed. I didn't. And Ava. She looked at me like she'd seen something break open in my face. That night, I stood in the pantry and cried. Not for the insult, but for the years I'd let myself shrink small enough to fit his narrative. That same week, I got a call from Natalie, my client who ran the stationery brand. She had referred me to 3 new business owners. All women. All struggling, all ready to pay in full. I accepted all 3. I worked late balancing Ava's school schedule with marketing plans and consultation calls. Made time by waking up at 5 a.m. and working until 1 a.m. I was tired. But I wasn't stuck. The more I built, the more I saw. The gaslighting, the neglect, the illusion of control, and it made me want to prepare even more. I started journaling not my feelings but his patterns. The times he contradicted himself. The financial inconsistencies. The odd transactions in our joint credit card statements. I emailed myself daily notes. Labeled them documentation. Simple, precise, real. One evening, as I tucked Ava into bed, she whispered, "Mom, are you okay? You're working a lot." I kissed her forehead and said, "I'm building something, sweetie, for us." She smiled. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. If you saw betrayal unfolding piece by piece, would you act fast or prepare in silence? Tell me below. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Justice begins here. I confronted him on a Tuesday. Not because I planned to. Not because I had rehearsed it. But because that morning while folding laundry in our bedroom, his phone buzzed. He was in the shower. I wasn't looking for anything, but the screen lit up and I saw it. Same place Friday. Last time still lingers. I don't remember folding the rest of the towels. I just remember the way the air changed in the room. Thicker, heavier. Like I was standing underwater. He came out of the shower in a towel humming something. Something light, carefree. I held up the phone. Didn't say a word. His face stopped moving. Then don't jump to conclusions, Karen. That's just work banter. I didn't speak. So he kept going. You're blowing this out of proportion. She's young. It's harmless. Harmless. It wasn't the lie that hurt. It was how practiced he was at delivering it. How long, I asked quietly. My voice barely registered above the hum of the ceiling fan. He sat on the edge of the bed, drying his feet slowly. Like we were talking about the weather. Does it matter? He said. Then, without looking up, she makes me feel seen. The words landed like glass under my skin. And what was I? The ghost in our kitchen. The voice behind every schedule, every lunchbox, every PTA sign-up. I walked out of the room. Didn't slam the door, didn't cry. That night, I slept in Ava's room. She didn't ask why. She just curled next to me and whispered, "I like when you sleep here." The next morning, I called Alana, my closest friend since college. She was the only one I hadn't told anything to. Until now. We met at a bakery off Glenwood. Cinnamon rolls, black coffee, the smell of fresh dough, the kind of place that smells like stability. I told her everything. The email, the hotel, the folder, the confrontation. She didn't interrupt, just listened. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Karen," she said softly, "you already know what to do. You've been doing it quietly for years." And that's when it clicked. This wasn't new. This wasn't a fall. This was a build-up. A slow erosion of dignity, one comment, one lie, one absence at a time. I spent that afternoon calling a lawyer. Her name was Cassandra Wells. Divorce attorney. Sharp voice. Softer eyes. I met her in a small office with dusty blinds and framed degrees. The air smelled like lemon disinfectant and legal paper. She asked, "Do you have documentation?" I handed her the flash drive. Also, a printed index, income accounts, LLCs, savings, investments, and a timeline of every suspicious charge under our joint account. She raised her eyebrows. "I've had clients show up with lipstick-stained collars," she said. "You brought a forensic file." I smiled just barely. Then she asked, "Are you ready to go through with this?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought of the years I spent sitting in school pickup lines. Of Ben skipping parent-teacher conferences. Of him calling my business cute in front of his friends. Of Madison Blake and the way her name had started living in the silence between us. "Yes," I said. And that was the moment everything shifted. We began the process that week. Filed quietly. Didn't tell the kids yet. Didn't tell his parents. Didn't change anything on the surface. Ben noticed. He always noticed when he lost control. He started doing the dishes suddenly. Buying me flowers. Coming home early, too late. Too quiet. One night he brought home takeout and said, "Let's talk. I think we've lost each other, but I don't want to throw it all away." I looked at the table he'd set. Steak, my favorite. Red wine. The brand he used to forget I liked. And I realized he was only trying now because he was scared. He wasn't sorry, he was defensive. So I said calmly, "I'm seeing a lawyer." His face twisted. He knocked over his glass, reaching for a napkin. "Then you're really going to destroy this family over a few texts?" I didn't respond. He stood. "Karen, be reasonable. You don't even have a real job." And there it was. The truth. He thought I was still powerless. Still small. Still depending on his version of life. But what he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that my cute little business had grossed over $200,000 last year. That I had equity in 2 growing startups. That I had quietly invested in myself when he had stopped doing so. I didn't move out right away. People think when a woman decides to leave, it happens fast. Like some cinematic moment, bags packed, car keys grabbed, dramatic exit under a thunderstorm. But the truth is slower. Quieter. I stayed. For Ava. For Eli. For myself. Because I wasn't leaving without clarity. And I wasn't giving Ben the satisfaction of saying I walked out because I was emotional. I was building my exit like I'd built everything else in that house carefully, silently, while everyone else slept. I started sleeping in the guest room. Ben didn't question it at first. He just mumbled something about space and retreated behind his laptop. But the distance wasn't new. It was just finally visible. The kids noticed. They always notice. Even when we think we're hiding things well. One morning Eli asked over cereal, "Are you and Dad mad at each other?" I looked at him, his shaggy hair, his sleepy eyes, his spoon half floating in milk. "We're just figuring some things out," I said. "We still love you. That doesn't change." He nodded slowly. Didn't press. But the silence between spoon clinks was heavier than usual. At night, I lay in the guest room scrolling through old photos on my phone. Vacations. Holidays. Birthdays. In all of them I was smiling. But in most of them I wasn't seen. I remembered the Christmas we hosted his family cooking for 12, setting the table with my grandmother's china stringing lights until midnight. Ben had given me a necklace that year. Everyone clapped when I opened it. But the clasp was broken. And he never offered to fix it. It sat in my jewelry box for 5 years, still unworn. That memory haunted me now more than the affair. Because it wasn't about passion, it was about neglect. Layered daily and disguised as normal. One evening after the kids were asleep, I pulled out the financial files again. Laid them across the dining table. Flash drives. Tax returns. Contract copies. Screenshots of every deposit from the past 6 years. And I made a spreadsheet. Not for court. For myself. Because I needed to see in black and white what I had built. The total shocked me. $688, 412.37, earned on evenings, weekends, school hours. With no help. No praise. No permission. I stared at the number. And for the first time in a long time I felt power. Not anger, not revenge, just calm. Later that week I met Cassandra again. We sat in her office with the blinds drawn. Her paralegal brought coffee and a manila folder labeled Delaney v. Delaney, Discovery Prep. Cassandra tapped her pen. "We'll file for equitable distribution. But if his legal team underestimates you, that's our leverage." I nodded. Then she asked the question I had been avoiding. "Do you want spousal support?" I hesitated, because a part of me, the part that still flinched when someone raised their voice, felt like asking for support meant I was weak. But the other part of me knew. It wasn't about weakness. It was about record. "No," I said. "I want a clean break, and I want my business off the table." She leaned back. "You've protected it well. And given that he didn't contribute, we can argue it's separate property." I exhaled. It was happening. For real. When I got home that night, Ben was in the living room flipping through cable channels like nothing had changed. I walked past him silently. He followed me into the kitchen. "Karen, I know we're in a weird place, but do you really want to do this? The kids, our families." "Our families." I turned. "Your mother hasn't spoken to me directly in 5 years, Ben. And the last thing she sent me was a recipe for pot roast addressed to Dear Homemaker." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I grabbed a dish towel, started drying the plates. He stood in the doorway, unsure whether to fight or flee. "I just don't want to lose everything," he muttered. And there it was. Not love, not regret. Just fear of loss. I didn't respond. Because I didn't owe him reassurance. I owed myself honesty. That weekend, I took the kids to my sister's. We baked cookies. Ava helped stir. Eli showed his cousins how to build Lego bridges. My sister looked at me across the kitchen and said, "You're lighter." I smiled. I felt it too, not free yet, but getting there. If you saw the cost of staying and the courage of leaving, what would you choose? Tell me below. Quiet strength is still strength. I started wearing lipstick again. Not for him. Not for anyone really. Just for me. It was the same dusty rose shade I used to wear back when I was still working full-time, before playdates, grocery lists, and Saturday soccer games took over my reflection. That morning, as I lined my lips in the mirror, I realized I hadn't disappeared. I had been waiting. The kids were at school, Ben was at the office. The house was still. And I finally had time to act, not just react. I printed every bank statement from our joint accounts. Highlighted every transfer I didn't recognize. Every hotel name, every ATM withdrawal from cities he claimed he never visited. Then I went to the bank. Our branch manager Lisa had known us for years. She used to give Ava lollipops at the counter. Today she met me in her office and closed the door. "I'm separating my name from all joint accounts," I said. "And I'd like a full printout of every transaction tied to my social security number since 2018. She looked surprised, but only for a moment. Then she nodded. "Do you want me to freeze any pending authorizations?" "Yes," I said. "Anything over $1. Oh, that isn't payroll or utilities." As she typed, I stared at the pen in my hand. Gold heavy. Stamped with the bank's logo. Even it felt more solid than my marriage. She handed me a folder with a soft smile. "Good luck, Karen." I walked out lighter. Next stop, my accountant. His name was Joel, 60-something, tired eyes. A dry sense of humor I appreciated. I handed him the folder with my business's earnings. Asked him to review my tax exposure and prepare a valuation. "I need this ready for court," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. He thinks you've been baking cookies all this time." I didn't laugh. But he did the job well. Within a week, I had a clean valuation for Delaney Strategies, LLC. $312. Zero in assets. No debt. Consistent growth. I printed 5 copies. 2 for court. 3 for me. The next step was psychological. I had to tell the kids. It was a Saturday morning. Crisp air, cloudy sky, pancakes on the griddle. They sat at the table, Ava doodling, Eli fiddling with a Lego piece. I sat down, hands shaking. "Guys," I began, "Dad and I have been having some serious conversations, and we've decided to make a big change." Ava's pencil stopped. Eli looked up. "We're going to live in different homes soon, but you'll still see both of us. We love you both so much, and that doesn't change. Ever." Silence. Then Ava's small voice. "Are you getting divorced?" I nodded. Eli said nothing. "Then will we have to move?" I smiled gently. "Number. You and I will stay here. This is still your home." Ben had tried to contest that. But Cassandra was firm. If I could prove this was the kids' primary residence, the judge would likely award possession, at least temporarily. That night, after they went to bed, I sat in the living room with the folder in my lap. The house smelled like lavender detergent and chicken broth. I felt calm, not confident, but calm. Ben came home late again. I didn't greet him. He didn't expect me to. He walked past me like a tenant. Good. Cassandra filed the official petition 2 days later. Service of documents would be arranged at his office per my request. I wanted no scenes at home, no theatrics. He got served on a Wednesday. That night, he came home furious. Slamming doors. Accusing me of humiliating him. "You really think a judge will give you custody? You think your hobby business makes you equal to me? You're acting out of spite. You'll regret this." I let him shout. Then I handed him a single sheet. A list of all the extracurriculars I'd signed the kids up for. The parent-teacher emails, doctor appointments, therapies, meal plans. Everything I had quietly managed for years. He stopped mid-rant. I said nothing. Just walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Pulled out a mason jar of soup, poured it into a bowl. Saturday at the counter and ate slowly, steadily. He left the room. And that silence felt louder than all his shouting. The next day, I installed a new lock on the filing cabinet in my home office. Printed a new sign for the door, Delaney Strategies. Client calls in progress. Please knock. No one in the house ever knocked. But I did it for me. Because it mattered. That Friday, Cassandra and I reviewed the financial disclosures Ben's lawyer submitted. It was laughable. He had underreported half his stock portfolio. Claimed our living expenses were fully covered by his income. Completely omitted the Cayman Islands account I'd already flagged from a shared vacation deposit 3 years ago. I slid the receipt across the table. She smiled. He has no idea who he's dealing with. I know, I said. That night I sat on the front porch after everyone was asleep. The air smelled like fresh cut grass and September. I sipped tea and opened my journal. Wrote today, I stopped asking for permission. If you had to choose between being comfortable or being respected, what would you do? Comment below. Justice isn't loud, but it moves with intention. The turning point wasn't loud. It came quietly in the mail. A letter from Ben's attorney. 3 pages long, formal, detached, predictable. But it ended with a sentence that hit like a slap. Our client requests that Mrs. Delaney vacate the shared residence within 14 business days and that primary custody of the minor children be awarded to him given his superior financial position. Superior. As if value is still measured in pay stubs and suits. As if 12 years of holding this family together was inferior. I read it at the kitchen table next to a half-eaten bowl of cereal Ava had left behind. The milk was starting to curdle. The moment I finished reading, I folded the letter, slipped it back in the envelope, then picked up my phone and texted Cassandra one sentence. It's time. She responded in under a minute. Let's move. The next day I met with Natalie Kim. She had been a client once, now a mentor. We sat in the back booth of a small cafe downtown. She wore black jeans and a white button-down minimal makeup just like always. I told her everything. She didn't blink. I want to make this official, I said. Scale, protect assets. Prepare for long-term independence. She nodded, pulled out her tablet, and got to work. We filed a Delaware LLC to shield my investments. Opened a business checking account with a new institution. Created a structure for equity tracking and tax shielding. You're the product, Karen, she said. Protect the producer. Then she leaned in. And it's time you stop hiding. You don't owe anyone smallness. That weekend I took the kids to my sister's again. Told them we were doing a girls' weekend baking board games hair braids. While they were gone, I turned the guest room into an official home office. No more hiding invoices in recipe books. No more whispering Zoom calls from the laundry room. I moved my files. Mounted shelves. Hung my framed degree on the wall, CPA, Indiana University class of '01. It still meant something. Ben saw it Monday night. He stopped in the hallway. Said nothing. But I saw it in his face. The shift. The unraveling of the story he had told himself that I was dependent, docile, cornered. I was none of those things. The next phase was gathering witnesses. Alana wrote a statement about the day I told her. Natalie provided a sworn declaration of the contracts, earnings, and business growth. Joel, my accountant, confirmed tax filings and year-over-year growth. Even Lisa, the bank manager, gave documentation of my independent accounts, how long they'd existed, how they'd grown. But the most powerful testimony came from the kids' school. I requested a meeting with Ava's guidance counselor. She remembered me from every parent meeting, every fundraiser sign-up sheet, every math tutoring request. You're the one who handles everything, she said without prompting. I asked if she could submit an affidavit confirming my role in their education. She agreed. And with that, I had the foundation for full custody. Meanwhile, Ben got louder. He started showing up early to school pickup, offering to take over. Started posting photos with the kids on social media like it was new. He was branding. His lawyer requested mediation. Cassandra declined. We go to court. His bluffing. But we're not. She was right. 2 days later, he emailed me directly. Karen, we don't have to do this the hard way. Think of the kids. I stared at that sentence for a full minute. Then replied, I am. I started rehearsing. Not for trial, though, that came later. I rehearsed how I would answer questions if the judge asked me why I deserved custody. Why I stayed home. Why I ran a business on the side. I looked in the mirror at night, said it out loud. Because I was never just a housewife. I was the house. The foundation. And I said it until I believed it. I also began making small symbolic changes. I switched the family calendar from Ben's Google Calendar to a printed planner on the fridge, color-coded, visible, tactile. I unsubscribed from the wine club Ben signed us up for. Canceled the car detailing service he never told me cost $300 a month. Donated the designer blazer he bought me 2 Christmases ago, tags still on. With every decision, I peeled back another layer of performance. Then came the prep for trial. Cassandra sat with me for hours. We reviewed every financial point, every email, every discrepancy. She coached me on language. Don't say he made me. Say I agreed at the time. Don't say I didn't have a choice. Say I prioritized my children's needs. Don't say I just wanted peace. Say I deserve stability. She reminded me over and over. This isn't about punishing him, it's about protecting you. I wrote that down. Taped it to my bathroom mirror. The day before court, I took Ava and Eli out for ice cream. It was warm for fall. The kind of day that pretends summer hasn't ended yet. They laughed about toppings. Argued over flavors. And I sat across from them, memorizing their faces. Tomorrow, I would sit across from their father in a courtroom, but today I was still their mom. Present. Anchored. Clear. That night I stood at the front door and looked around the house. Every corner had a memory, but not all memories deserve to stay. I reached up to the top shelf of the hallway closet. Pulled out the folder KD Holdings. I held it to my chest. Not for comfort. For what it represented. All the quiet preparation. All the work done in shadows. All the nights I whispered to myself. Just keep going. Tomorrow it would no longer be hidden. If you knew justice depended on the truth, no one else saw, would you stay quiet or let it rise? Share below. Your voice holds power. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No marble columns. No dramatic lighting. Just beige walls, scuffed floors, and rows of wooden benches that creaked when you sat down. Still, everything felt enormous. I wore a navy blue dress, professional but not flashy. Hair pulled back. No jewelry except for a small gold bracelet Ava had made for me out of beads when she was 5. It spelled strong. Cassandra stood beside me. Clipboard in hand, calm, crisp, ready. Across the aisle, Ben adjusted his tie. His lawyer, a man with 2 white teeth and slicked back hair, whispered something in his ear. Ben nodded, smirked. It was the same smirk he used when he got out of speeding tickets. The one that said, "I always win." The judge entered. A woman in her 60s, gray hair twisted into a no-nonsense bun. She glanced briefly at both sides, then down at her notes. "Let's begin," she said. Ben's attorney opened the arguments. Spoke for nearly 30 minutes. He painted a picture: Ben as the primary earner. Ben as the financially responsible parent. Ben as the one who provided a stable home supported by years of hard work. I sat quietly. Let it play out. When the attorney suggested I had limited income potential, I saw Cassandra's eyebrow twitch, but she said nothing. Then came the best line. Mrs. Delaney was, by her own choice, a housewife with modest part-time pursuits. Mr. Delaney, by contrast, managed assets exceeding 7 figures. He ended with a slight bow. Theatrics. The judge nodded, then turned to Cassandra. Miss Wells. Cassandra stood. Calm. Precise. And began. Your Honor, we respectfully dispute the characterization of Mrs. Delaney as limited or dependent. She walked toward the table and picked up a thick folder. Held it up. This is 6 years of tax documentation from Mrs. Delaney's LLC, including verified contracts, third-party valuations, and consistent annual growth. She opened to the summary page. Gross revenue last fiscal year $214,000. Ben shifted. His lawyer didn't look up. Cassandra continued. These earnings were achieved while simultaneously managing full-time parenting responsibilities, coordinating education, medical, and social needs for 2 children with no household staff and minimal financial support from Mr. Delaney for daily caregiving. She paused, then handed the folder to the court clerk. "But let's not just discuss numbers," she said. "Let's discuss participation." She presented a calendar showing my appointments with teachers, doctors, therapists. She played voicemail clips of Ben declining involvement. She read excerpts of emails where Ben referred to my business as Karen's hobby. The courtroom stayed still, then Cassandra delivered the final piece. "Mrs. Delaney has operated her business without a cent of investment from Mr. Delaney. In fact, his involvement was not only absent, it was dismissive." She submitted client letters, Natalie's affidavit, my accountant's validation. Then she addressed the court directly. "Justice isn't just division of assets, it's recognition of labor, seen or unseen." The judge looked at me for the first time. "Mrs. Delaney, would you like to speak?" I stood. My legs shook, but my voice didn't. I didn't build my business to prove anything. I built it because I had to. Because my children needed shoes and I needed to remember who I was. I glanced toward Ben. He didn't meet my eyes. "I stayed home, yes. But I didn't stay still. I've raised 2 children. I've built a company. And I've done it without applause, without permission, and without recognition. But not without value." The judge nodded. "Thank you." We recessed for 2 hours. I sat outside on a bench under a dying oak tree. The wind was sharp, the kind that carries endings. Ben didn't come outside. Neither did his lawyer. When we were called back in, the courtroom felt colder. The judge didn't waste time. Having reviewed the financial documentation, parental roles, and contributions of both parties, the court finds as follows. I barely breathed. The business and related investment accounts established by Mrs. Delaney during the marriage shall be considered separate property. Ben flinched. The marital home shall remain the primary residence of the children with physical custody awarded to Mrs. Delaney. Mr. Delaney shall have visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. He opened his mouth to protest. The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Delaney, this court has noted your lack of disclosure regarding offshore assets and significant omissions. You may consult with your attorney, but these rulings stand." The final blow came softly. Spousal support denied. Because I hadn't asked. Because I didn't need it. After the ruling, people began to leave. Ben approached. His lawyer tried to stop him, but he shook him off. He stood in front of me, eyes tight. "You played me," he said under his breath. "All these years you were preparing." I looked at him, no heat. No pity. I was surviving. He clenched his jaw. "Enjoy the house. We'll see how long you last on your little empire." I smiled just enough. "Longer than you lasted on lies." He walked out. Cassandra placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it." That night I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I made dinner. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Ava set the table. Eli asked if we could watch a movie after. The normalcy broke me more than the verdict. Because for the first time in years, normal didn't feel like performance. It felt like peace. After the kids fell asleep, I walked into my new office. Closed the door. Saturday at my desk. On the wall was a sticky note from Ava. "You're the best CEO mom ever." I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up my pen and began planning the next quarter. Not as a wife, not as a defendant, but as a woman who stayed quiet long enough. Would you rather be underestimated or fully seen, even if it costs everything? Comment below. Quiet justice is still justice. 3 months after the court ruling, I replaced the rug in the living room. It sounds small. But that rug had been Ben's pick thick gray investment grade, he once said. I always hated it. Too heavy, too cold. It muffled the sound of the kids laughing. I chose a warm woven one this time. Soft beige with little blue flecks that reminded me of the ocean. Ava and Eli helped unroll it. They said it made the house feel brighter. I agreed. Life didn't change all at once, but it changed honestly. Mornings were rushed, school lunches, client emails, coffee spilled on the porch steps. But I wasn't doing it in hiding anymore. I moved my desk to face the window. The light hit just right around 2 p.m., when I usually pause to stretch, breathe, or just exist. Work grew. Quietly, steadily. I started saying no to clients who didn't align. I stopped undercharging. I launched a newsletter, Delaney Weekly, full of tips for small women-owned businesses. It felt good, not flashy, not viral, just strong, grounded, sustainable. Natalie called one day and said, "You're doing it. You're not just surviving, you're designing your own system." I smiled. Because she was right. The kids adjusted. Ava started writing poems. One of them was titled Mom's Quiet Power. Eli asked if he could help with client spreadsheets. He just wanted to type on the big keyboard. We built a new rhythm. Pizza on Fridays. Board games on Sundays. No more tiptoeing around tension. Ben still called. Sometimes to reschedule visits. Sometimes to check in. He'd say things like, "You look good, happier." Or, "I never realized how capable you really were." I never responded to the compliments. They weren't for me. They were for him to ease his own shame. One afternoon I ran into Madison at the grocery store. She looked surprised. Uncomfortable. She reached for avocados she didn't need. I simply nodded, because the truth was I didn't need her apology. She hadn't broken my marriage. She just wandered into the ruins. I started therapy again. Not because I was broken, but because I was finally safe enough to process the years I'd been silenced. Dr. Reynolds helped me unpack what wife had meant in my house. She said something I still think about: empowerment doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just takes up space unapologetically. On the 1-year anniversary of the divorce, I did 3 things. I bought myself a deep blue armchair, the exact one Ben once said was too feminine for the office. I donated every blazer he ever gifted me. I launched a microgrant for single moms starting small businesses. It was called the Strong Fund. Named after Ava's bracelet, we awarded $500 grants to women building from the kitchen table just like I did. No strings, just belief. I shared my story carefully at a local women's conference. Not as revenge, not as a war cry, but as truth. Afterward, a woman in her 50s hugged me and whispered, "Your story felt like mine if I had just chosen myself sooner." We stood there for a long moment. No words. Just legacy passing quietly between us. One night, Ava crawled into bed with me after a nightmare. She pressed her cheek against my shoulder and mumbled, "Are we gonna be okay, Mom?" I kissed her forehead. "We already are. The house feels different now. There are candles that smell like lemon and rosemary. Frames on the wall that show us laughing, messy, free. The fridge is cluttered with school art and post-its that say things like, 'You're brave. You did hard things.' And my office. It has a plaque on the wall now. It reads, Delaney Strategies founder and CEO Karen Delaney, built from scratch. Backed by truth. I still make mistakes. Still get tired. Still question things. But I never again question my worth. I learned that justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes quietly through a locked cabinet, a notarized form, a spreadsheet that tells the truth. And healing. It's not linear. Some days it comes in waves, other days in teaspoons of calm. But I welcome it all. Because this time, the life I'm building is mine. If you've ever felt invisible in your own story, know this: your power hasn't left you. It's waiting. Share your story below. You are not alone. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more real stories of closure and empowerment.